In this session, we will discuss about sequence. Sequence is used to generate unique sequential values, especially for generating the values of primary key columns or unique columns, especially the ID columns of a table. Normally, the primary key does not allow duplicate values and it does not allow null values. To insert values into the primary key columns, we always require the unique values, and the values should be sequential. When we are working with transactional tables, we do not know what value we have inserted in our previous record. To know that, either we should fetch the maximum primary key ID value of the table, add 1 to that, and then insert a new record, which is time consuming. Instead of that, we can create a sequence which will be stored in the database, and sequence will be generating unique values always, and it will always generate the sequential values to insert data into our tables. So for the primary key columns, we can always use the sequence value, which will be generating the sequential and unique values, which is always the next value, the next available value for that particular table. And this one sequence can be used in any number of tables, but it is advisable to use one sequence for each table, because irrespective of the number of tables, sequence will be always generating the unique sequential values. If we use a single sequence in two different tables, so one value will be, some values will be generated and stored in one table, and the next values will be stored in the next table. So we can see some gaps. The values will not be continuous. To avoid this, we always use one sequence for a single table only. Sequence has two pseudo columns. One is curval and the other is next val. Curval will always give the most recently generated value by the sequence. So whatever the value the sequence has generated, that value will be displayed by the curval. But if we want to access the curval from the sequence, at least one value should be generated by the sequence. Immediately after creating the sequence, if we try to access the curval, since the sequence has not generated any values, it throws an error. So at least it has to generate one value, then only the curval can be accessible. Next val gives the next available value in the sequence to generate. The next value which can be generated by the sequence will be given by the next val. By default, sequence will start generating the values from its min value. So the default min value will be 1. So if we do not specify the min value clause, then it will start with 1 by default. So always sequence will start with min value. And there is another clause which is start with. If the sequence has a start with clause, for the first time sequence will start with the value which is mentioned in the start with clause. Otherwise, it will always start with min value. And by default, the sequence will be incremental, and the incremental value of a sequence will be +1 by default. What are the options or optional clauses available with sequence? The sequence has the following options. One is increment by, start with, min value, max value, cycle, cache. These are the options or optional clauses available with sequence. All these are optional. Increment by, it is used to increment the sequence, whether it is incremental or decremental, denotes by the increment by clause. The default value of increment by is 1. When we omit or miss this clause, the default value of increment by clause will be 1. Next, start with clause. The default value of start with will be min value, or we can specify a value. Min value, the default value of min value is 1. Max value, the default value is a bigger number, a huge number. Cycle, the default is no cycle. Cache, the default cache is 20. Any sequence can be of incremental or it can be decremental. The increment by clause can have a positive value or it can have a negative value. A positive value in the increment by indicates that the sequence is an incremental sequence. If we specify a negative value with increment by clause, that indicates the sequence is the decremental sequence. If we specify +1 in the increment by, the sequence will be incremental and it will be incrementing by +1 always, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. If we specify -1 in the increment by clause, then the sequence is decremental sequence. So when the increment by has +1, it will start with min value. If the increment by clause has -1, then the sequence will start with max value and it will be decrementing by the value what we have specified in the increment by clause. If we specify -1, the increment will start with max value, the default max value is this, and then it will be decrementing by -1. That is, suppose if we specify the max value as 100, then the sequence will increment by as -1, and in this case the sequence will start with 100 and then decrementing by -1, that is 100, 99, 98, 97 and so on. Once the sequence reaches its max value, whether it has to stop or it has to continue decides the cycle. If it is incremental sequence, it will start with min value, it will be incrementing by the value specified in the increment by clause. Once it reaches max value, then it will check for the cycle. If we have specified as cycle, then again it will reiterate or restart from its min value. If we specified no cycle, which is the default value, then once it reaches the max value, it will stop. If it is decremental sequence, it will start with max value, it will be decrementing by the value specified in the increment by clause. Once it reaches min value, then it decides. If it is no cycle, it will stop. If it is cycle, then again it will start from the max value. Cache, the default cache is 20. That means instead of generating one value at a time by the sequence, it will generate the number specified in the cache. This many values it will be generated and stored in the buffer. For the subsequent generations, it will not go to the database, it will be fetching the values from the buffer or memory itself. Since the default cache is 20, by default 20 values will be generated by the sequence at a time. This is to improve the performance. And there is a catch here. There is a drawback also that we discuss in detail in the practical session. Start with class. If we specify the start with clause in the sequence, for the first time the sequence will start with the value specified in the start with clause, because start with clause has the highest priority than the min value. for the first time, for the first iteration or for the first cycle. So always the sequence will start with the value specified in the start with clause in the first cycle. Once it reaches the max value, if it is incremental sequence, once it reaches the max value, if the cycle is specified, then it will restart again, but during the second cycle it will not consider the start with value. It will start with min value only. So the value in the start with clause will be considered only for the first cycle, and the value of the start with clause cannot be altered. While creating the sequence, we have to specify, and the value specified in the start with is final. It cannot be altered. So when we specify the cycle decides whether the sequence has to be restarted after reaching its max value or not. So this is about brief introduction on sequence. Now let us move on to the practical session. There we can discuss in depth details about the sequence, each and every feature. Sequence. First we will see the create sequence, and then what are all the options available in the sequence, and what are the restrictions, possibilities, all those things. Then we will see the pseudo columns of the sequence, and we will see the DCL operations and DDL operations, which is possible, which is not possible on the sequence. User sequences is the data dictionary view where the information about sequences will be stored. User underscore sequences. It has sequence name of the sequence, what is the min value, what is the max value, what is the value of increment by clause, cycle flag, order flag, cache size, and last number. The min value of the sequence, whatever we used, max value of the sequence, what we used, the value of increment by clause, what we used while creating the sequence, along with sequence name, cycle flag, whether it is cycle yes or no, cache size, default is 20, we can go for 0, that is no cache, or any number, last number, the value which is generated most recently by the sequence, which is the last value generated by the sequence. And there is one more option, order flag. So order clause is also available. Default is no order. All this information will be stored in the data dictionary view about the sequences, that is user underscore sequences. Now let us see. First we executed select star from user sequences. As of now we do not have any rows, we don't have any records. Now let us create a sequence. At the simplest form, create sequence name, create sequence S1, because all these are optional clauses. That is why we have default values for every clause. Since all these are optional, we need not include all of them. So we just created sequence with all the default values. Sequence is created. Describe S1 because it is not a table, so it cannot be described. Create or replace. Or replace cannot be used with sequence. only create is allowed or replace is not allowed. Now select star from user sequences. Earlier we do not have any rows. Now we have created one sequence, so the values associated with S1 will be available in user sequences now. One row selected. Sequence name is S1. What is the min value? The default min value is 1, which we have specified. Default min value is 1. Max value, a big number. Increment by +1, and then C after increment, cycle flag, order flag. Cycle flag no, order flag no, that means no cycle, no order. After that, cache size 20, the default cache is 20. Default cache is 20. After that, last number, it is 1. It has not generated any value, but it is giving 1. That means it will be starting with 1 now. Next, sequence has not generated any value as of now. But now, for the first time, we are using S1.curval from dual. As we already know, for the first time, if you try to generate the curval from the sequence, it will throw an error. Sequence S1.curval is not yet defined in this session. Means we have not yet defined, we have not yet generated any value for this session. That is why it is throwing an error. Now, we use next val. Select S1.nextVal from dual. We know that it will always start with min val. We do not have any start with. Start with value will not be stored in the database. So it will start with min value, which is 1, and it will be deciding whether it is incremental or decremental based on the value specified in the increment by clause. In the increment by clause, we have specified 1, that is +1. That means it is incremental. So it will be adding +1 to the previous value. So for the next time, it will generate 2. So subsequent values, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. Now there is a max value which is very big number. Till this number, it will be continuously generating the values 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. Here we are generating 4, 5, 6. The slash will re-execute the previous statement. When we say previous statement, when we execute this statement, this particular statement will be stored in the buffer. So whatever is buffer, that buffer content will be executed when we give the slash. So in the buffer, always only one statement and one output message will be stored in the buffer. Buffer can contain always only one statement. It can be SQL statement or it can be PL/SQL block. If it is PL/SQL block, only one block will be stored. So one statement will be stored in the buffer and one output will be stored in the buffer. When we say output, this output can be either error message or successful message. That is data with successful message. Either data or error message. Any one can be stored in the buffer, but not together. So output of only one particular statement will be stored and the particular statement will be stored in the buffer. So when we give slash, what is there in the buffer? That is this particular statement. So this statement will be re-executed again. And when it comes to the output, so before up to this point, this statement will be stored in the buffer and this value 2 will be stored in the buffer. So once we give this slash, this statement will be stored and the next value 3 will be stored in the buffer. At any point of time, the buffer can have only one statement and its output value, either success or failure message, error message. So like this we executed 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have executed 10 values. See, all these values are unique values and these are sequential values. When we say sequential, the sequence is defined by the increment by. Since we give 1, it is generating with the sequence of 1, that is 7, 8, 9, 10 like that. 11. Up to 11 we have executed. Now let us see user sequences. S1 min value is 1, max value we just reduced, bigger number, increment by 1, no cycle, no order, cache is 20, last number is 21. We have generated values up to 11 only, but the last number which it is showing is 21. Because there is a cache, default cache is 20 values will be generated at a time by the sequence from the database and stored it in the memory. So when we first execute, that is s1.nextVal for the first time, instead of generating one value, it will generate 20 values from the database and store them in the buffer into the database or memory, database memory. So all the 20 values are available in the memory. In that, one is used. When we say s1.nextVal for the second time, it will not go to the database. From the memory or from the buffer itself, it will fetch and it will display here. So all these values are coming from the buffer up to 11. And not only 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Up to 20, all the values will be available in the buffer itself. Till that, these values will be generated or retrieved from the buffer itself. It will not go to the database. That is why from the database it has already generated 20 values. That is why the last value in the database is showing as 21. That means from 21 it will start now. Up to 20 the values are generated. 21 is the value which is readily available to fetch or to retrieve from the database. Now again we used s1.nextVal, 12, 13, 14, 15, all these are coming from the buffer itself, 17, 18, 19, 20. Till here it is from the buffer itself. See, if you execute if we select from user sequences, it is still showing as 21. If we generate next value, that is 21, then it will show it as 41, because it will generate 20 values. See, 21 is generated, and if you go to user sequences, it is giving as 41. That means 20 values will be generated at a time from the database. That 20, how it is taking based on the cache. The default cache is 20. That is why it is taking it as 20 at a time. Next, as of now, we have created a sequence with all the default values. Now let us create a sequence with optional clauses. So as of now, we have seen increment by +1, starting the sequence with 1 and cache as 20. Now let us see, create SS1, increment by 2, +2, still it is incremental sequence. Min value as 101. Instead of starting the sequence with 1, we are starting the sequence with 101. And max value as 150. That means 150, maximum 50 values it will generate. No cycle. Once it reaches max value, there is no starting back again. No cache. The cache is 0. Each time, for each value, for each next value, it will go to the database and bring the value. That means performance will be bit slow, because every time database hit will be there here. Sequence is created. If you see SS1, min value is 101, max is 150, last number is 101, that is it will start with 101 now, cache is 0. No cycle, no order. Increment by is 2. SS1 dot next val. So first it will start with min value, that is 101. Next value will be, see, if you see user sequences, it is 103 now because increment by 2, right? So it has generated one value. Next value which is readily available is 103. So it is not giving 20 like earlier case. Now if you execute next val, it will be 103 because increment by is plus 2, 103, 105. Like this it will generate up to 150. We are generating 143, 5, 7, 149. After 149, it has to generate 151, but the max value is 150 only. So it cannot generate beyond 150. So when we execute this statement, it is giving sequence SS1 dot next val exceeds max value and cannot be instantiated. It is already reached max value, so it cannot exceed the max value. If we are starting with 100, it can generate 150 also. But after generating 149, next is 151, which is exceeding the max value, so it is not possible. So here it is 151. So next value should be 151. It cannot be generated beyond max value, so it is not possible. Create another sequence, increment by 2, min value, max value, cycle, we want to restart this once it reaches max value, cache as 0, it is giving error. The number of values to cache must be greater than 1. Minimum cache is 1. The cache cannot be 0. If you want the cache as 0, you should use no cache. Minimum cache is 1. Otherwise, you should use no cache. Cache 0 is invalid. See, we used no cache. That means we don't want any cache. In earlier case also we used no cache only. So we tried with cache 0. It is not accepting. See, in our earlier example, it was no cycle, it is cycle now. So minimum is 101, maximum is 110. After reaching max value, again it will start from the min value again. See, SS2 dot next val 101. It will generate 103, 5, 7, 9. After 109, it should generate 111, 111, which is exceeding the max value. It cannot generate beyond 111, beyond 110. So if you see user sequences for SS2, minimum is 101, max is 110. The next available value should be 111, which is beyond the max value, which is not possible. Since the cycle is yes, we can generate the next value, but it will start with min value again. Again, SS2 dot next val 101, because the cycle is yes. Second cycle is started, again it will go. So if you see user sequences 101, 103, but we cannot identify which cycle it is, first cycle, second cycle or third cycle, like that. Cache is 0. Now we want to alter the sequence. Alter sequence the cache as 1. The number of value to cache must be greater than 1. Greater than 1. It cannot be 1 also. It should be greater than 1. So minimum cache is 2 then. Alter sequence SS2 cache 2. Yes. Minimum cache is 2, not 1 also. It is greater than 1. So sequence is altered. So cache can be altered. Alter sequence SS2, increment by 1, min value 1, max value 1, no cache. Min value must be less than max value. This is one restriction. The relation between min value and max value is min value must be less than the max value. It cannot be less than or equal to. It must be less. Okay. Alter sequence SS2, increment by 1, min value 1, max value 2, no cache. So now min value is less than the max value. There is no cycle here. Yes, this is the link, this is the restriction or relation between min value and max value when there is no cache and there is no cycle. So min value must be less than the max value. Min value can be 0. Yes, sequence is altered. There is no difference here, same. So SS2 we are generating, min value is 1, increment by is 1, max value is 10, no cache. I think 1 is already generated. SS2, 1 value it has already generated, min value plus 1. That is why 1 plus 1 it is giving 2. Like this 3, 4, 5. Now we want to increment, we want to alter, increment by 1, min value as 1, max value as 2. It is already generated 5. Max value cannot be made to be less than the current value. The sequence has already generated the values up to 5. We wanted to make the max value as 2, which is not allowed because max value cannot be lesser than the current value. So the current value is 5. So we can make the max value as up to 5. 5 is also allowed. See, in our next example we made the max value as 5. It is altered. No restriction. So this is another relation between max value and the recently generated value or the current value. Max value cannot be altered less than the current value. It can be equal to current value but not less than current value. Now let us create decremental sequence. Increment by -1. We do not have decrement sequence. Decrement by clause in the sequence. Same increment by clause, we can use negative value over there. A negative value in the increment by clause indicates that the sequence is decremental sequence.